It is noon on the East Coast. It's lunchtime, which means that you can step away from your desk and join us for the third in the series of Masterclass with Fortuna Admissions. Over the past couple of weeks, I have been joined by colleagues from Fortuna to talk about the Harvard Business School, Stanford GSB, but to complete the Trinity, obviously today we needed to bring in the voices of Wharton. And I'm delighted to be joined by two of my wonderful colleagues from Fortuna Admissions, Brittany Maschal, a former member of the admissions team at Wharton that sat through the development of their team-based discussions. Brittany also had great admissions experience at Princeton and the Woodrow Wilson School and Johns Hopkins. And then also with us from the West Coast, Julie Ferguson. Julie was both a Senior Associate Director of Admissions at Chicago Booth, so we're covering all of our bases with the M7, but was also the coordinator of the Lauder Institute during her time at the Wharton School. And I know that many people that I speak to at Fortuna have a very specific interest for this incredible internationally focused aspect of the program. So this masterclass, like all of the others, of course, is being recorded. And you'll be able to catch the Harvard and the Stanford sessions on our YouTube channel. I'm very lucky to work with so many former associate deans, admissions directors, associate directors from the top schools. As you can see on this screen, we've pretty much got you covered for all of the top US and European business schools, which means that whatever your plans, whatever your next step, we're here to provide inside and lots of insider admissions advice. We offer free consultations to everybody around the world and take those consultations really seriously, looking through your resume, perhaps your LinkedIn profile, to really sort of understand where business school and the MBA might fit with your next steps. So do sign up for one of those consultations. As I mentioned with Brittany and Julie, they bring all of this insider experience and have worked with so many successful clients at Fortuna, applying not just to Wharton, but the other top US business schools. And here we are, what are we, less than 10 weeks away from round one. So we're going to get started, and over the next 60 minutes, we'll cover all of the essentials as you consider the MBA classroom of Philadelphia, perhaps as your home, starting from as soon as September 2023. This particular series then comes back again in July as we get closer to those deadlines, and we'll be breaking down to all of the different components, of course, these pieces of the admissions puzzle, as we think about essays, as we think about letters of recommendation, as we think about interviews, and just how you should strategically position yourself for applications to the top school. So do put those different webinar dates in the diary. They're all on the Fortuna website, and you can register for them now. But today is all about Wharton. And of course, perhaps naturally, we wanted the bigger picture, both about the school, and I guess as a consequence, the sort of things that the MBA admissions office headed by Blair Mannix is really looking for. So Julie, lovely to have you with us. And if I can start with you, our basic question, what is Wharton really looking for?
Thanks, Matt. It's really great to be here and to join you for this great discussion today. So this is kind of the big question that a lot of our clients have is, what are these different schools looking for? So for Wharton, I like to think of it from three different perspectives. So academics, professional experience, as well as on a personal level. So first of all, Wharton is a really rigorous, academically challenging program. So the admissions committee is first and foremost going to want to see proof that you're able to, handle the intensity of the program. And this is really demonstrated through your undergraduate record, and for some people, a graduate record, right? If you have a master's degree or even a PhD, as well as your test scores, along with any other sort of pertinent information that you might have, such as a special certification or qualification, like if you're a CPA or a professional engineer. Professionally, the school is also looking to cultivate a class that is comprised of people with, really varied background from different industries, different job functions. Having, this wide range of experience really brings sort of this diversity into the classroom and the way that they can, discuss different issues that come up in business. So within that, you will want to demonstrate some leadership experience as well. And I think Brittany might talk a little bit more about kind of like how to sort of like stand out from the crowd, but within your professional experiences to demonstrate a little bit of leadership experience or leadership skills that you've gained through your professional experience. And then the final piece of the puzzle for me is one that's often, I think, overlooked by applicants or ignored, or they think that the admissions committee isn't really interested in who they are as a person. But it's really important to demonstrate sort of who you are outside of just test scores and your job. So in an applicant pool that's filled with people who are probably equally as qualified as you in terms of their academics and their professional experience, the sort of personal aspect of how you present yourself in an application and to the admissions committee is really what's going to help you kind of, pull away from the crowd and stand out from the crowd. And again, I think Brittany might touch a little bit more on that. So I think that, it's just really important to think about yourself holistically, the same way that the admissions committee is evaluating your application holistically.
Right. Julie, with our colleague Judith, we've talked about your days, all of you at Wharton, and of course coming up with the essay questions that are part of this. And it's been interesting to note for that last point about that more sort of personal side of an individual, accomplishments and impact that they've had. With Blair's team, they've now specifically pinpointed and say, talk about how you can contribute to the community. Do you think that's sort of an echo of what you're describing?
It definitely is. And it kind of, really goes along with how they incorporated the, group discussion as part of the interview process, is trying to sort of get applicants to understand what they're looking for via certain pieces of the application. So like you said, obviously the essay questions, but also the group discussion, kind of asking people to really sort of reveal themselves, beyond just what might be on their resume.
Right. Brittany, just to bring you in, I've often sort of looked at, the top US schools and perhaps considered Wharton among two or three others, maybe Sloan, Booth, Columbia, sort of the unapologetically quant-driven schools. In fact, I think the former dean, Tom Robertson, always used to say, problems are there to be solved by numbers. I always wanted to ask Mrs. Robertson what she thought about her husband's philosophy on life. But just in terms of the GMAT and GRE, and we'll sort of get those test scores out of the way, Julie's talked about that academic rigor. Do you think that there is that insistence on strong quant scores? And where does it come from? Is it just to make sure that you can then thrive in the classroom?
Yeah, I think it goes beyond just thriving. I think all the top programs, Wharton in particular, there's a benchmark for those numbers that they see as something to meet, to not only help you do well in the program, but really thrive in it and contribute to the classroom. And maybe it goes a little bit beyond into your future, into your career. But I do think that it's mainly a classroom component, and they want to make sure that everyone's going to really be adding value.
And so that quant score on either of those two tests, but for some, that's a genuine challenge, and yet they would bring so much to the Wharton MBA classroom. Are there good ways to compensate, perhaps, if you've got a lower GMAT score?
Yeah, I think that in terms of, standing out, quant ability to me isn't going to be a standout element, but it is a benchmark that you will need to meet. I'll talk a little bit about that. When we talk about letters of recommendation, I think your sort of letters of rec are a really good place to round out the application if there is a weakness, and sort of getting someone else to talk about it. It can be really helpful, and how you're demonstrating those skills and abilities maybe in other areas. So if it's not on the transcript, if it's not in the GMAT or the GRE, maybe it's something that you're doing in your everyday work that can help them see that you're going to be able to kind of keep up with everybody, as well as contribute and thrive in that setting.
Julie, I guess pre-Huntsman Hall and the wonderful setting now for the business school, there was a plaque, if we go back far enough in history, that talked about the Wharton School of Finance, and yet Wharton is so much more, whether we look at the healthcare management program that is world-class, real estate, they've now got this fantastic center for tech and innovation, sort of an incubator. Perhaps briefly on those, but notably for Lauder, because it is a very special piece of Wharton. Just talk a little bit about that program and how it knits together with the rest of the MBA.
Yeah, so Lauder really is such a special program. It creates its own sort of ecosystem and mini community within the larger Wharton MBA community. And it's, really comprised of people that are, I don't want to say worldly, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you've traveled all over the world and you've done all these, crazy things, but you've demonstrated a sincere interest in the world and sort of global economics and how that affects everybody. And so the Lauder program is such a great complement to the Wharton MBA, because it sort of brings this human element that other MBA programs don't have when it comes to sort of thinking about the global economy and how you as an MBA can affect the global economy in a positive way. So you'll find a lot of the Lauder students are, interested in nonprofit work, impact investing. And I know impact investing in general has sort of increased in popularity at MBA programs overall in the last few years, but the Lauder students have sort of this extra little je ne sais quoi, little edge to them that brings this sort of like global perspective to the program. And not just from the fact of like, oh, I lived in a different country, but they really have sort of put themselves in positions for really their history as people, whether it was, starting in high school, doing something internationally, certainly in college, doing something internationally, obviously speaking at least one other language. So English as well as another, sometimes up to 2 or 3 other languages. So just really brings this sort of international component to the Wharton MBA that goes beyond just international students, if that makes sense.
And it certainly has a worldly chic if it has a je ne sais quoi element to it. Perhaps just in terms of admissions, are you then distinctly applying and indicating you're applying to Lauder? And how does that positive impact, you've got this curiosity and the global mindset that you're describing, will that then sort of positively impact on the overall application as it might with HCM or some of the other specializations at the school?
Yeah, so Lauder has its own essay, has its own sort of like piece of the application. And when you actually go into the physical application, you would select Lauder as one of the joint programs that you're interested in. So that'll automatically kind of kick open another piece of the application that is the Lauder essay. You would have to complete the Lauder essay, which is really kind of focused on sort of that international component and your interest culturally in a global economy. It also requires a separate interview. And so it's almost like you're applying to 2 separate programs, but you have to be accepted to Wharton in order to get into Lauder. Sort of on the back side of things, obviously the Lauder admissions team coordinates a lot and communicates a lot with the Wharton admissions team. They're not completely separate in that sense, but you have to be able to sort of stand alone as a Wharton applicant and a Lauder applicant. So I think for a long time, there was this sort of misconception that Lauder was the back door into Wharton, and that's just not the case. You really have to have just as good of a profile as any other student applying to Wharton.
So from standing alone for Lauder to standing out, and Brittany, every year Wharton, as with other schools, publish a bit like an infographic, this sort of incoming class. Now, the incoming class of this year was particularly stand out itself as they talk about average GPA, average test scores, the fact that 28% had studied a STEM background, and of course for Wharton this year that 51.6% of the incoming class were women. But I think often that's a document that can unsettle individuals, that they might look at it and say, well, I don't have that test score, I didn't study STEM, and worry that, that they won't fit. Maybe if they said that 42% of Wharton students wore glasses, of course made by Warby Parker, let's be clear about that, then more of them would be wearing a pair of spectacles at their interview. But so just this bigger question of standing out beyond that snapshot that is published every year.
Yeah, so admissions is interesting because you need to both fit in and stand out. So, when you read those profiles, I think it is important to think about how what you have to offer fits within what Julie mentioned. So, your academic background, professional background, and sort of who you are as a person. And you do need to try to meet those metrics. I usually talk to applicants about, getting in the ballpark, and sort of the further you hit it, towards the back or out, the better you're going to be, in some ways. But as long as you're in the ballpark, it can often be worth applying. So I think once you sort of know where you fit, in terms of those three elements, the way that you can think about standing out is really how you're different. So it's this interesting combination of being the same, but also being different. And I think one of the things that I advise applicants, and I think we all advise applicants, in particular to Wharton, is to really think about the school's unique value and culture and what makes it actually special to you. In sort of terms of what your goals are. And so we sort of know that they're looking for applicants who have a track record of impactful leadership, collaboration and team orientation is super important. Obviously, the analytical ability, those quant skills, it's important, even if you're, you think you have these other things that are going to help you stand out. But I do think from there, you need to think about what makes you special and what makes the program special to you. And also think about the value add that you're going to have to the program. Julie kind of mentioned this, and we'll talk about this, I think, more in the essays. There are components of the application where you have the opportunity to show a much more personal side of you. And I think that many applicants, to Wharton in particular, they over-focus on other elements, and they feel that they can under-focus on really showing who they are and what they're all about, because it's not as explicit in the components of the application. But I really do believe that one of the ways you can stand out is to focus on that once you've really gauged your fit, across these other elements.
Right. Julie, we've all worked with clients at Fortuna, and the schools themselves talk about sort of an imposter syndrome, that everyone else is going to be smarter, more connected, whatever sort of different levels they might judge that at. And yet, Blair and others will say, they'll talk to incoming students, and they said, I almost didn't apply. So how do you then like to work with clients and say, we've got so much to work with, and to really then, be able to put that story together and stand out in what is a highly selective admissions pool?
Yeah, I think that that's one of the strengths that we have at Fortuna with all of our coaches, is being able to really work with our clients and personalize their experience with us to really find out what their story is. So we often find when we start working with clients that they're a little bit reluctant to sort of give that personal story even to us as coaches, because they just sort of think like, well, you just need to know about what I do for work and all these great accomplishments. And I always try to say, no, I need to know who you are. Like, what is it that you like to do? What do you like to engage in? So with Wharton specifically, I like to talk to my clients about how, yes, they're looking for smart people, but they're looking for people. And you need to be a people person as well, because Wharton is, really trying to kind of cultivate this environment of collaboration and teamwork. Hence, the team-based interview a few years ago, and obviously, the revised essays a couple of years ago. And so it can sometimes be a challenge to get clients to think about that. But I do think that that is one of our strengths in the way that we coach people, is that is really important to us as coaches, is to get to know our clients really well. And then we can help them really identify the areas in their life that will be appropriate for the application. There's certainly things that are not appropriate that we wouldn't want to include as a theme, but there have definitely been instances in my coaching experience in the last 9 years with Fortuna that my client has said something sort of off the cuff or offhand. And I'm like, that is definitely something that we want to incorporate. So you never quite know what you might get out of a conversation with your coach. So it's always really important to just be honest and open to the process of having an admissions coach and trusting them to sort of shepherd you through the process and to figure out what your story is to kind of get you to that point that Brittany said that gets you that home run in the application.
Right. And Brittany, just to pick up on, you talked about aligning with the school's values, really being able to demonstrate a deeper level of understanding of Wharton as a school, its culture. In terms of doing that research, I mean, it's not like you have to memorize every page of their website. You'd probably been a little bit nervous if somebody had done that. And I don't need to speak to 47 Wharton MBAs before I successfully apply to the program. What do you think is really helpful? Is it sort of discussions with individuals that perhaps even through clubs and their time at the school, reflect some of the things that you're really passionate and interested about and would want to bring your own ideas and energy?
Yeah, I think conversations with people who are close to peers in age, also people who may be in your same industry or have related career goals that might align with clubs they were in the program, and even current students. I think visiting campus, I know that wasn't possible for many years, visiting campus, hanging out, talking to students who are walking around, really just embedding yourself there, even if it's for a whole day, a couple hours, you will get the vibe of the school. And I think that it's a strong one. I mean, it's not a program that's for everyone. There are elements of it that are not, for every applicant. And I think that the more research that you do, the better. I personally have found, from feedback from applicants that talking to current students, even people who they work with, is the best way to really see if they can see themselves there. And you also, there's so many things that you can use that information in so many different, areas of the application process, whether in your essays, in interviews, maybe not as much anymore, but for other schools, certainly. So yeah, I think you need to kind of hit the ground and put in the work.
And from your own time, Brittany, in admissions at Wharton, and therefore all of those countless files that you've read, interviews, you could tell, right? You could tell when someone really had taken the time, perhaps on a more personal level, to really get to know the school.
I think for some applicants, I mean, there are ways that you can learn about this completely online, and depending how strong of a writer you are, you may fool some readers. But you also have off application interactions with admissions, hopefully, right? Hopefully, if you're doing this process right and you're doing this to the max. And it might be in those interactions that you're really genuinely able to convey the deep work that you've done to get to know the program and sort of your deep understanding of your program, of the program, and where you fit in it. So it's not all about just what fits in the box of the app either. There are lots of other ways to demonstrate this to admissions without being annoying. I think that's important to know. You always have the applicant that sends 50 emails, and that's not a good look.
Well, I wore a red shirt for last week's Stanford Masterclass. I'm now in the deep blue of Wharton, so clearly aligned with my school. We're going to talk about rounds, and of course the typical 3 rounds, but our viewers are coming in with questions, and in fact we'll start way back, and a question that we've had, Julie, from a deferred candidate, so perhaps a senior in college, could be in a master's degree, who wants to apply for Wharton. So as we talk through the rounds, if you can also talk about those deferred applicants and which round is intended for them in their senior year. But let's start with round 1, and that's on its way, and round 2 in early January. So what's your sort of insider insight for which round I should apply to?
Yeah, I'm probably going to sound a little bit like a broken record here because I feel like we always talk about this, but the round that you apply in is truly dependent on when you feel the most prepared to submit the best application. Now, this doesn't really apply to round 3, and I'll circle back on that. So really focusing a little bit more on rounds 1 and 2, I think that they are pretty comparable in terms of selectivity and competition. But there's pros and cons to both rounds 1 and 2. So applying on round 1 will give you the benefit of knowing before the round 2 deadline of, the other potential schools that you might be applying to. If you have an interview at Wharton, you probably won't know the outcome of the final outcome of whether you are denied, accepted, or waitlisted until after the round 2 deadlines, but at least you know that you're sort of like still in the game. At that point. But round 1 deadlines, especially at Wharton, also don't really typically give you the time to participate in some of the activities that Brittany just mentioned, like going to campus and maybe sitting in on a class and sort of just being in the environment and sort of immersing yourself in what it would be like, a day in the life of a Wharton MBA student. Because obviously throughout the summer, there's no classes. And then there's not a lot of time between, when the program starts and when that first application round comes up. So if you are able to do your sort of due diligence and deep dive research work sort of in the spring and kind of get your sort of get your legs under you about like what makes Wharton special to you, what makes it a good fit for you, then round 1 is going to be great for you because you have all summer to sort of put everything together. Applying in round 2 gives you a little bit of breathing room to do the due diligence of that work, of visiting campus, of talking to current students, and maybe connecting with some alumni, attending the admissions events, if you were not able to do that perhaps previously in the spring. But also if you have any professional changes that might be coming up in that space between rounds 1 and round 2, then round 2 is probably going to be a better fit for you in terms of what's going to give you sort of the best application possible. One potential drawback for round 2 is that you pretty much have to have all your applications in, right? There's not really a lot of breathing room in terms of, okay, well, I still have round 2 deadlines to put in a bunch of other applications if I don't get the interview.
Right.
So this kind of leads me to round 3. And I typically will advise my clients against a round 3 application. For most schools, and especially, the Whartons, the Stanfords, the Harvards, the Booths, most likely round 3, there's fewer seats available that are going to be open. And I also liken round 3 to finding the needle in the haystack. So the schools in round 3 are looking for something really particular that's going to help round out their profile. So Matt, to your point earlier about when you look at sort of here's a class profile for the incoming class of, 2022, and it's, people are coming from these industries, these companies, this much experience, here's the GMAT, here's the, undergraduate GPA. Round 3 really gives schools an opportunity to be really particular about how they're filling specific gaps in the profile of the class that they're bringing in. So, it's not to say that it's impossible, round 3, but unless you have a truly unique profile, and I know it's really hard for us to be honest with ourselves and really sit with the idea of maybe I'm not that different from everybody, but in round 3, like you really have to have that certain something that the admissions committee is really going to be looking for to fill, sort of like I said, that sort of something that they might be missing in the class profile.
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah,
and the MBA program is bigger, right? I mean, it's around 850 students in a typical year. So there's a little more room through round 1 leading into round 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I would say that for the deferred candidates, and Brittany, you might have just a little bit more insight here, but I feel like the same rules apply. So if you feel like nothing is going to change in your sort of life and in your profile between rounds 1 and round 2, then I'd probably go for round 1. If you have that sort of background information about why Wharton is right for you and kind of what your plan is. So I think that for the deferred candidates, it's a little bit more about the planning aspect of, you're saying, in the future, I want to do this. And like, you have to be really, I think, precise in how you're presenting that.
Right. And Brittany, just on that MOLIS program, which of course, until as recently as 2-3 years ago, was actually only available to UPenn students. So a senior in college that then wanted to sort of reserve their place 2, 3, 4 years out. Are we typically aligning, and then in that senior year, we can run as late as round 3. I mean, Julie's advice, I think, for round 3 for other applicants that are in the workplace is absolutely spot on. But will MOLIS be more flexible in terms of applications later in the academic year?
Yeah, so they've put an April deadline on for that program, and it's like a very short turn, really. So it's not kind of as spaced out as the regular rounds, and so most applicants do submit. They're coming to the kind of end of that academic year, and I think they turn interviews. I think it's as soon as almost 4 weeks after you apply. So I think many schools, Penn included, have sort of, I don't want to say they've struggled with, but have changed around that process a little bit in recent years to sort of fit kind of what's best for undergrad students, because like Julie said, like they're kind of coming at this process from a very different place. So it's really important that for the deferred applicants, you're checking whatever the guidance is that they're going to give you, because things have changed like a little bit, I think, for some of these deferred programs, Penn included.
Right. And Julie, perhaps just a final word for any viewer, whether they're a private equity associate, they're working at McKinsey, they're at one of the big tech firms, and they're thinking, I know that in our office already 2 of my colleagues are going to apply in round 1, but this is something that and from one year to the next, that there will be private equity associates in round 1, and equally in round 2, the consultants, the bankers, the software engineers. So you're not looking to fill a particular bucket or a particular professional profile all in round 1, back to your point of applying when you can truly send in the most compelling application.
Yeah, so I've definitely had this experience with clients before where they've said, they work for, one of the big consulting firms. And so they say, I know for a fact that 4 other people from sort of just my division or just within, my office regionally are applying. And I actually say, that's great. That actually gives you sort of a real life example of who is applying. So if you were to actually compare yourself to that person, can you compete with them? And so it really is sort of this real life scenario of like, you have this sort of like mini set of people that you can compare yourself to immediately. So especially if you're all doing the same job, then it becomes really sort of, I think, eye-opening for a candidate to say, oh, okay, that's who I have to sort of like compare myself to and think about, how do I get the admissions committee to see us as 2 individual unique applicants versus I'm just a private equity applicant or I'm just a consulting applicant. So I like that. I think it's a great challenge to have is to do that. And then, through that process, you can perhaps think about being a little more strategic about when you apply and what rounds you apply in, so that you're not sort of kind of bucketed in with the other 5 people from your office that are applying. Is, that's part of the strategy. And it's part of what we do as coaches, is really think through all these different sort of situations and so the nuances of the application.
Right. That's a great insight. And you've set us up beautifully for a little later in this masterclass, when we talk about Wharton's group team-based interview, when 6 of you are sitting around and thinking, well, all of us are competing for places in the program, but that can be actually very collaborative. But before we get to the interview stage, of course, we have essays to submit. And Brittany, I'm going to turn to you for this one, just to sort of perhaps pick out aspects of the Wharton essays and then your tips and advice for how to tackle them.
Yeah, I love essays. I'll just say that to start. I think essays are where applicants can really shine. And if there's a big ROI and sort of where you put in a lot of time into this process, especially for a school like Penn, you should be putting time into the essays. Wharton's essays are actually not that like crazy creative or like anything wacky or wild. They're pretty standard, pretty traditional. And essay 2 is actually quite open-ended now. Wharton essay 1 is a traditional, career goals, why school essay kind of hybrid. Your main goal in that essay is to very clearly outline your career goals, both short and long term, and connect the dots between where you've been, where you want to go, and how this MBA program is going to help you get there. If you cannot do that in this essay, you need to start over, right? That is the core, that's the core of this essay. I do think that there are a couple kind of like special things that you could do with this essay to maybe like take it up a notch. One, this kind of goes back to what Julie and I've mentioned this a couple of times now. How can you personalize, this application? I often encourage applicants to think about their background story, sort of the why behind their goals, the why behind what they want to do, what they say they're going to do. And if they can weave that into the introduction of this essay, I think it's a really great way to sort of personalize it and compel the reader to want to read more. Many essays of this style, because it's a traditional essay, just start off like strictly answering the prompt, and that works for some applicants. But if we're going back to how you're going to stand out, you really need to try to bring something different to the table. So this is just where you're going to also show if potentially what you feel is unique about this program in terms of your goals, and just really kind of connect those dots. The second essay, you can kind of go a lot of different ways with this essay, which makes it, to me, a harder essay. And I see this as an essay where you can zoom out at the rest of your application. And if there's anything that you feel like is super important to you, gaps, things that are special, anything that you're not covering, this is your place to kind of, fill it. And also, again, really compel them and get personal. Extracurriculars, I like to dive deep into extracurriculars with applicants, and it's not just like the standard stuff. I've read a lot of Big Brothers, Big Sisters, mentorship, sports leagues, kickball, things like that. I'm not saying don't do those things, like that's great, but there is a way to kind of dig even deeper and going back and thinking about Wharton's values. What have you done? Maybe it's not even on the resume. Maybe it's like that last little teeny line, like some obscure hobby, like you tie flies, like you're a fly fisherman or something like that. I don't know. You really can use this essay to again, just, compel them to want to talk to you live, and show them where you might make really unique and meaningful, contributions to this program. So, being unique, being personal, maybe even being vulnerable, this essay kind of gives you some flexibility to be able to do that and cover any one of those 3 elements that's important to you. It might be academic, it might be professional, and it might be personal. It might be something bottom of the resume or even off the resume. But the essays are really, it's really the best place to add color and kind of come to life. And, there's an expectation that you push yourself to do that.
To take you back, Brittany, to that first more traditional sort of career essay, and of course with Fortuna, long before we're jumping into the essays, the sort of strategy questionnaire, career vision, all of this thing, it speaks to what Julie was saying about really finding out more about the individual. But Wharton quite rightly describes itself as a transformational experience. And you could graduate from this school and be doing something wildly different in the next post-MBA steps. The school knows that. So therefore, is what you're looking to share drawing on the background, as you said earlier, just to sort of show, well, it's compelling, but it's also coherent and really, does provide a very natural next step, and how Wharton can help you to achieve those next steps?
Yeah, you need to also, I hate to use the word sell, but I'll use that word because I can't think of a better one at the moment, why you need an MBA. So in this essay, they need to walk away understanding that you actually need an MBA, which means your reasons can't be the Wharton brand is great. Your reasons can't be the great network. Your reasons can't be just the transformation that will take place in your life and your career from spending 2 years, around these amazing, like, other rock stars. Like, everybody already knows that, and they know it about themselves. So you do need to be much more detailed. And part of my process with helping applicants hash out their career vision is really drilling down to, okay, so these are the goals, but what do you need to meet those goals? And that means opening up and saying, this is what I don't know. These are the skills that I don't have, the experiences that I don't have, and here's how the program is going to help me get those things. So it's a very structured and very strategic essay that, if you're really good, you can also color with some more personal elements. So I do believe that they want to walk away from it understanding that you understand the value of this degree, and not just for, like, kind of the fluffy, like, big reasons that everybody might want an MBA from outside of school.
Julie, some of our readers might be more comfortable writing a restaurant review or writing computer code rather than writing essays. So as we sort of step back, just in terms of an approach to writing essays, is it important just to start writing? How do you advise your Fortuna clients just to get this whole process of sharing your story down on paper, or of course word processed?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people it can be intimidating and difficult to write an essay. It's been a few years probably since our clients have written anything that has to be structured in the way that the essays have to be. So I really just personalize my approach with my clients to the person in front of me. So if they feel like they're a pretty strong writer already and they want to just kind of dive in and write the structured essay, I'm good with that. For a lot of people, we do sort of a brainstorming session where we talk about, okay, here's the question. What do you think are some potential bullet points? What is some content that you think is appropriate here? So obviously for the first essay, pretty straightforward in terms of your career goals. So that's a little bit of an easier one to tackle than the second one. So I think just sort of like brainstorming and almost like brain dumping, like I like to start with too much information. And this kind of goes for, I think, pretty much everything that we do with our clients, whether it's the resume or letters of recommendation. It's about, give me everything and let me help you figure out what stays and what goes. That is my job. That's my expertise, is kind of figuring out what is the stuff that's going to stand out. So I always tell my clients not to self-edit. That's my job. I edit. Give me everything and let me kind of see the bigger picture, and then we can dial it in and be really concise and really clear about how we're delivering that information in a written essay.
I feel like we're just inches away from another fishing metaphor and kind of reeling in the story after we put the fly on the hook. Now, there's the candidate's voice and a very personal and authentic voice, but there are other voices that are involved in this whole application process to Wharton, both recommenders and, of course, who you would choose to then reflect the sort of insights and perspectives that Wharton is really looking for. So Brittany, if I can turn to you for advice on perhaps the choice of recommenders and what it is that we're looking for them to share.
Yeah, Wharton prefers that you have at least one direct supervisor, and I prefer that it's someone who knows you recently. There are some applicants, though, who don't feel comfortable asking a current or direct supervisor. Maybe they're not telling that person that they're applying to business school. So there are ways around that. And we might look back to a former job. I tend to, and I know other coaches might feel differently about this. I prefer two professional recommendations unless I feel the applicant has an extraordinary other recommender that could answer the questions, maybe a board membership role, something, a role where the person or the applicant is actually doing the things that align with what Wharton's looking for through their two different annoying questions that they ask, different from every other school. So and that's part of our process, is to really outline, like Julie said, all of the options and think about who the best choice is going to be in context of the stories that those people might tell. One thing that I tell everyone to avoid is like celebrities, big, like fancy names, things like that. Not going to be helpful if the person doesn't really know you. They need to be using examples and anecdotes from their work with you, which means it can't just be some big name that was like your neighbor when you were 5 or something like that. It's not really going to hold up.
So the extraordinary recommender, and we have worked with many clients that involved, a former prime minister or president of one of the G20 countries, or as you say, individuals that are perhaps very much in the public eye. But given the sort of insight that we really then want to share, I mean, you're presumably working quite closely with this individual, sharing, what you're looking to share through the resume, through the essays, so that it's complementary, but at the same time very distinct in the additional insights that they can then bring to share with the admissions office.
Yeah, they might, you might talk to your recommenders about the themes in the application, the values of the school, and what they're looking for. And they're looking for, through these letters, the same thing that they're looking for in your application. They're looking for your impact and leadership. They're looking for your team orientation and your ability to collaborate, and they're looking for your analytical skills, right? They're looking for lots of other things too, but often I coach an applicant to think about what the school is looking for, where they demonstrate that in their work, and then work with their recommender, encourage them to also think about, your presentation of these things is from a very different perspective than mine. So that's going to differentiate, but maybe there's also like something else that I'm not even thinking of about myself that you think is really special about me that will help me, A, contribute really well, stand out in the Wharton classroom, as well as be super successful in my career. So I think it's really important that you should not overcoach recommenders because you want that authenticity. And oftentimes we don't see ourselves how other people see us. So that's a role of the coach, but you also should invite that perspective in from your writers, which is why who you choose, really trusting them and helping them understand this process, is going to be very important.
And if you had signed up for Berkeley Extension or NYU Extension for a course in calculus, statistics, finance, there are courses, graded courses that would show some of those core quant skills. But you mentioned earlier that recommenders could address some of those analytical skills. Why is it better coming from them than you trying to insist in your essay?
Well, I mean, we do have the additional information section. Most schools have this. It's just the vibe of it. It's like making an excuse. It's almost like, okay, so I don't like to, so backing up a second, I don't like to have applicants approach the application from a deficit approach. I want their application to be all about what's awesome about them, the value that they have, what's unique about them. And then when I read this really strong application and I get to the additional information, and there's kind of this like wimpy excuse almost about like, I don't feel strong about my quantitative abilities, like that detracts from the rest of an amazing application for me. And I know that that's just my point of view, but when I feel like someone else says it and the applicant takes the high road, that does something for me. And I know that might, there really might be cases where the applicant's explanation is important and valid and can be drafted in a way where it can support the rest of the application and the story that's being told. But even then, if you can have someone else, drill down on that for you, I don't think it can hurt.
Right. Julie, you said earlier, apply when you really can submit the strongest application. So through the essays, your resume, transcript, and then these letters of recommendation, and bingo, out of over 7,500 applicants, not everyone gets invited to join the Wharton team-based discussion. Maybe we can start, just describe to viewers how it is structured, and as a consequence, the sort of preparation to really then perform well in that group setting.
Yeah, so the Wharton team-based discussion is basically 5 or 6 people will be invited to be in the group, and you will be given a prompt ahead of time to prepare, and each person gets 1 minute to sort of present their solution or their answer to the prompt that they're given, to introduce themselves and introduce their idea. And then I think that it's still, the TBD is still at about 35 minutes that the group has to come up with an idea. So as a group that you then discuss everyone's idea, or one idea bubbles to the top, it's always different based on the kind of the mix of people that's in the group. And then you have 5 minutes to present your idea to the admissions committee. And then following that, you have a 10-minute one-on-one session with an admissions committee member. So that's sort of the logistics of the TBD. When it comes to preparing for the team-based discussion, first and foremost, I would say work with us, work with Fortuna. Even if you haven't worked with us for the rest of the application, we have an opportunity where you can sign up just to do a mock practice session. And our practice sessions are great because it gives you that real life experience of being in a group discussion and answering the prompt. Aside from that, little plug for working with Fortuna, but aside from that, when you're preparing for the discussion, first and foremost, read the communication that the school sends to you and know what the prompt is. I can't tell you how many clients have not understood that, and they've shown up to a practice session and they're like, oh, I didn't know I had to prepare an idea. So just as part of the process, really read what they're sending you and understand what they're asking of you so that you know what to prepare. So the prompt is usually something along the lines of, I always think of it as Wharton's really sort of like looking for ideas for something, and it's sort of like free brainstorming that they're getting from these amazing people that are applying to the program, right? So one year it was designing a trek, an international trek. Last year it was designing an interactive course for their program. So as a candidate, your job is to come up with sort of the bigger idea, to be sure that you're answering every part of the prompt. So say, what is the name of the course? What department does it fall under? Who's the target audience? And then maybe what are the outcomes that you're looking for? What are the objectives of the course, right? So understand all the different components that go into answering the prompt, and then putting that all into a 1-minute pitch that you can pitch to the group. But then behind the scenes, I always tell my clients to then also have a deeper understanding of their idea. And if it was selected by the group, how can you then give a little bit more information or more background on it? Because chances are, say the 3 of us are in a group and, Matt, you say, oh, Julie, I really like your idea. Tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking. You want to be able to kind of come up with that. And so it's not necessarily spending a ton of time hashing out all the details. That's kind of what the group discussion is for, but making sure that you feel really confident and prepared to follow up on your idea should the group have questions or should your idea be selected. I think the other key sort of preparation point for the group discussion is to identify your role in a group, is to really think about, what role do I usually take on? Am I the person that keeps things on track? So are you the timekeeper? Are you the person that takes amazing notes and is able to then summarize that back to the group? Are you the person that likes to sort of like take charge of a situation? So identifying that going into it and sort of like having a handle on what you want your role to be within this group is really helpful, but don't be too married to that, because there may be someone else in the group that also likes to be the timekeeper. So just having some flexibility in how you are going to sort of be part of the group is really important. And that's just life in general, right? I mean, that's just working on a team at work, or whether it's an extracurricular project, is understanding that the point of the team is to elevate everyone and to allow everyone to shine, right? And to allow everyone to sort of like play to their strengths. So it's not a sharp elbows situation. It really is a collaborative team effort. So it's super important to remember that going into that discussion.
Right, perhaps the role of resolution conflict, if two individuals insist that their idea is the best one, or as you imply, that maybe the facilitator or someone within a theme that business schools are focusing so much on at the moment in terms of inclusion, making sure that everybody's voice is heard. So thinking about perhaps 2 or 3 roles that you could then really play in all of that. Wow, we've covered a lot in the last 55 minutes. And for was it? I think it was Kwame that wrote in asking about the Lauder program. Kwame, this whole session has been recorded, and Julie gave a great answer to that around minute 7, minute 10, but certainly worth catching anything that you missed, just based on the quality and insights of this discussion. So here we are. We're, as we said, about 10 weeks away from round 1. Maybe if you've already taken care of standardized tests, you're really set on round 1 and the opportunity to work with expert coaches like Brittany and Julie. So perhaps we can finish, both of you, just with final tips, bringing everything together, or even just how someone can best optimize the next 2.5 months that they have in front of them. Brittany, what would your tip or key piece of advice be to our viewers?
I would say focus on the essays. Don't under focus on the essays. That would be my final tip. Brag on your resume, get personal in the essays, keep it real, be confident in presenting something that you might think is a little risky. The reward could be very, very high. And if you work with a coach, be coachable. So those are my final tips.
Right. And I'll just echo what you said earlier about, really focusing on your strengths, the things that get you in, rather than being hung up on perhaps a particular data point. What about for you, Julie, final advice for our viewers?
Final sort of thought is, I like to think of the application as a way to market yourself to the admissions committee. And there's so many different pieces of the application in which you can do that. So upfront, determine what your brand is, and then make sure all of your application materials support that brand. So that there's sort of an on-brand message through the resume, the letters of recommendation, the essays, the sort of like any short answer things that you're including in, the actual application, and then how you then carry yourself over into the interview. So it's sort of, understanding who you are as a brand and really marketing and playing to that strength.
Well, there's one area that I often forget to bring to our viewers' attention. As all of you have seen, the level of insider expertise and insight. I'm no timekeeper, but these two have kept us on track with so many clear and very articulate pieces of advice for all of you. With that Fortuna team of over 40, over the last 10 years, we have accumulated what we describe as Fortuna's knowledge center. And they've broken down and reflected on that insider experience that they have for every single aspect of an application, whether it's that initial research, all the way through to interviews, through to the wait list, but it's all in this ever-growing knowledge center that obviously our clients have access to. And it starts with your story, as both Brittany and Julie have shared, getting to know you as an individual. And we consider that that first call that we have together jumps right in, to really get a sense. And as I said at the beginning, we take the time to review that resume. We have questions. We really want to explore, find out where business school fits in, and then those elements that will help you to shine. So do sign up for one of the free strategy sessions that we offer. And as I had mentioned, at the next Masterclass series through the month of July, and we'll be breaking down all of those individual components through essays, through transcripts, through letters of recommendation. It's all in there, in addition to the other great resources on the site. So thank you, all of us, for joining us. And in particular, thank you to Julie. Thank you for Brittany for bringing such great insight and advice in the last 60 minutes.
Thanks for having me, Matt.